is Keys to the Shop, episode 302, Data's Role in the Success of Your Coffee Shop, with Mark Calhoun and Jim Strarcev of PerfectCube. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and always glad to have you along today. I hope you're doing well. And welcome to those of you who have just joined Keys to the Shop. We've been going for about 5 years almost now. There are a lot of episodes, and the best way to stay updated with new episodes is to be subscribed to the show. So if you're not yet subscribed to Keys to the Shop, I would encourage you to just hit that button wherever you are listening right now. And also, if you like what you hear, and you've got people in your life that you'd really like to give a gift to, the gift of insights, and inspiration, and clarity, and success, then share these episodes with them. Now, Keys to the Shop, on top of doing this podcast, also offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. And what it means to work with Keys to the Shop Consulting is you get to work directly with me to help you start your business off on the right foot, or to level up your operations, your quality, your management. My focus is always to help you avoid needless pain and mistakes in your business, and also to help you lay great foundations for a sustainable future in coffee. So whether you want to work remotely over the phone with coaching and consulting, or you want to explore training and cafe assessments on site, I would encourage you to reach out to me. We can set up a free discovery call and talk about what you got going on and how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help. The email to reach me is chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee specializes not just in providing world-class commercial coffee equipment for the specialty coffee industry, but their focus is on helping you select the right equipment for your business. So whether you're talking about brewers, grinders, or espresso machines, under-counter refrigeration, small wares, Prima is an incredible resource to help you get outfitted and supplied with the best and the right gear for your context. And right now, when you visit prima-coffee.com/keys, you can get 5% off your order when you use the code KEYS5 at checkout. That's KEYS and the number 5 at checkout. And then you get 5% off. It's a pretty good deal. Again, go visit prima-coffee.com, explore what they have to offer, and don't forget to use the code KEYS5 when you check out. If you're in the market for commercial coffee equipment and you want to work with the best, then you need to work with Prima Coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Barista series from Pacific. This is the line of plant-based performance beverages that is basically the standard setter for excellence in plant-based beverages worldwide. They are designed for and by the world's best baristas, and that matters because they're bench tested before it even hits your bench, before it hits your bar. So no matter what you use from their extensive lineup, you can be sure that it's going to stand up to the steaming process. It's going to have awesome texture for latte art, and then be balanced in the cup. So the coffee is always the star of the drink. Check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com and get it in your store today. Try it for yourself. Tasting is believing. I think you're really going to be impressed. So if you want to serve world-class plant-based beverages in your coffee shop, then you need to be using the Barista series from Pacific. All right, everybody. So today we are going to be talking about how data factors into the success of your coffee shop with two people who know a thing or two about data. We're talking with the founders of PerfectCube, Mark Calhoun and Jim Strarcev. Mark and Jim's background is in financial data. They actually sold their financial data company to Charles Schwab back in 2008 and decided to try life in retail. And PerfectCube was born in that pursuit, as Mark and Jim ended up starting a gelato company and made great gelato and wanted to create something that would help them harness the power of data for their success, not just for their own store, but also for others. They gather and store your data and give you insights to better manage your business. And in today's conversation with Mark and Jim, we're going to be covering the topic of data and analytics and how it applies to retail in a deeper way than maybe we've assumed that it does. Of course, Mark and Jim have applied these principles to their own business, and now through PerfectCube, they give a great presentation at Coffee Fest on this very subject. And as we have this discussion today, we're going to dive into questions that you might have when it comes to how to properly approach the data that you have and how to make decisions based on what it is that you're seeing in front of you that will actually create change in your business that is lasting and healthy change. Mark and Jim do a great job helping us walk through the rhythms of checking data, getting over some psychological boundaries, what to pay attention to, and generally just how to wrangle data to our advantage. We need to have solid businesses, and I think the content of today's episode is going to help you achieve just that. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the founders of PerfectCube, Mark Calhoun and Jim Strarcev. All right, Mark, Jim, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you.
Well, mostly good. I just came from the dentist, so I'll apologize in advance if that sound funny at all.
Glad to have you here. Now, I want to know a little bit about your story, how, what you were doing before. Obviously, you were doing something with data, but getting into the food and beverage area and the hospitality area, that's unique. And I want to know how you kind of parlayed what you were doing before and how you parlayed that into hospitality the way you have.
We took a roundabout road to get to where we're at right now. Jim and I started our first business together in 2000, and it was a financial technology company called Intelligent. Long story short, we built that company up. We did a lot with data, and we sold it to Charles Schwab in 2008. And we had actually started a project to do, we called it data mining at the time, around 2007, 2008. That was the term everybody was using because they realized, we've got a ton of information. There must be some way we can use that. And we had, data on, I think, 120,000 accounts, financial accounts or something like that. And we thought, we had pricing, we had trading information, we had all sorts of information. And so we thought, we should be able to use this for, something else to benefit our clients. And so we started this project kind of exploring that, looking at it, analyzing, putting it together, seeing what was interesting. And to our surprise, the Schwab wasn't that interested in that project at the time. And so after we left Schwab at the end of 2008, after the transaction had been finalized and transitioned well, and we left all our employees and we started looking for something else to do. And Jim stumbled into, he loved gelato. He found this gelato shop he loved. They did gelato and coffee. And so he said, hey, we should open this, this store and do that and, see what we can learn from it.
I love gelato. I've always loved gelato. I had it since I first had it in Italy and found the gelato concept that I really liked. So I thought, if we're going to, merge from something outside of, the fintech area, we were looking at retail. I said, why not? Let's do gelato. That's it's an interesting concept. There weren't a lot of gelato places in Kansas City. So we thought that could be an interesting way to kind of explore getting into retail hospitality data.
Okay, so this now is kind of a pivot to get into gelato. You're like, well, we're into finance and data, and now gelato. So,
yeah, we had a non-compete in financial services, so we couldn't explore what we wanted to explore in financial services. So we needed another industry that was rich in data. And so we talked about it. We looked at it. We thought, retail does generate a lot of data, but we knew nothing about, retail. So we did decide to open our store. We hired someone to, that had retail experience to be the store manager. And, she taught us a lot and we learned a lot, but it was through that process of running our own coffee and gelato shop and eventually 2 stores, one here in Kansas City and the other in Houston, that we really started gathering data on retail.
Yeah, so as Mark said, it was, gelato is a bit of my passion, but obviously, business is probably more so, and it was kind of an interesting concept. And overall, there's just a lot of data. We were looking not only, from the retail, customer data, the business operation data, social media data. So we thought there was a lot of kind of interesting plays that we could pull in to really look at and see what we could do with that.
Okay, so there's a lot happening here because you've got your area of expertise, and then you've kind of entered into an industry that you, as a customer, knew a lot about, and then you hired expertise to help you run it. But still, there's the atmospheric drag of getting into that industry and finding out what things transfer over from your previous roles and industries into food and beverage and hospitality. So what were your first lessons in terms of data and in what you were experiencing in this shop, and what things kind of transferred over easily and made you think, wow, this really was the right move?
So when we opened the retail store, we thought like customers, and we discovered that that's actually a good thing to do. One of the first things that we did, I know I've listened to some of your podcasts before, Chris, and people talk about customer service, and we put a lot of emphasis on customer experience, both in our current workshops that we do and then when we had our stores as well, because that's ultimately the perception of the customer that matters. And so one of the things that we did was we sent our employees around to shop before we even opened. We were training them, and we sent them around to shop. Our first store was in a enclosed shopping mall here in Kansas City. So we gave them $5 and said, go buy something in the mall, anywhere, and just pay attention to your experience and how, what it's like and how you feel like as a customer. And so, they did that. And then they came back after 20, 30 minutes, and we all shared about the experience and, how they felt as a customer, if they weren't really acknowledged, except when they checked out, or if the person never looked at them, if the person never smiled, all of that information. And that's not a hard data point, but it's something that we teach in operational excellence, that you really want to focus on the customer experience and how you feel with that. And then short of that, that was one of the first things we learned. And most of the, business is business. So most of what we had learned in terms of listening to our customers and taking care of them and seeing how we can help them. Our business, philosophy has always been, we will be successful by helping other people be successful, whether that's making their day a little better by selling them, a good cup of coffee and a great cup of gelato, or if it's providing financial data or retail data, analytics, however we do, we feel like we're going to be successful when we help our customers be successful.
I think one of the things, we learned early on is, as I said, I was passionate about gelato, and we really chose to do the concept we did because we just made great gelato. We had a great product. And, I think kind of went in a little bit, and I think a lot of maybe coffee shop owners go in the same way as, if we have a great product, then everything else will take care of itself. When the truth of the matter is, all the other details were really the things that were really important. The great product wasn't nearly, as driven to the success of the business of everything else, the business operations, and looking at all the way we managed our staff, the way we trained our staff, the processes we put in place to really do a great customer experience and a consistent experience was really the lessons that we had to learn jumping in to do that. And as we said, and we made a great product, and we had a great product, but people weren't knocking down our door because we had a great product.
Obviously, the availability of back-end data for most operators is there. That's the selling point for so many point of sale systems, and you can access that, and we do, and we kind of live there sometimes. But then, from what you're saying, it's obvious to a lot of people. The life of the business is full of details that you might not see on some of that. So how did you end up sort of taking that experience and then using the data that you did have to make a difference in your business?
So for us, one of the things, since we didn't know retail, we had to figure out like what's a really good price point. How do we maximize our, the ability to profit off of selling a cup of gelato or a cup of coffee or whatever, while at the same time making it at an attractive price for the customers. One of the ways we did that, and people should do that, is they look at the data that's behind all that transaction. I mean, one of the things I think that surprises people, we talk a lot about customer behavior, and because the customers are the lifeblood, if they don't spend your money in your store, you're not going to be in business anymore. And it's always good to have good operational data. It's always good to pay attention to everything that's going on, to your labor and everything, and we can talk a ton about that. But if there's always something behind the data, there's a reason behind the data, and if all you're looking at is just focused on the numbers and the data, you're going to miss what's really happening in the broader picture of the success of your store. So like we would pay attention to the price point. We knew what our cost was, for all of our product, and we paid attention to that. We knew what we could sell it for, but we experimented, and then we watched. Like we would experiment. We knew we wanted to sell more than just a small cup of gelato, but that was like 60% of our sales, in the first few years of our store, our first store. And so we wanted to get people to buy more, buy a cup of coffee with that gelato, to buy larger cups of gelato, to buy, we learned that people will consume, a frozen dessert 2 or 3 times a month, but they'll consume drinks 2 or 3 times a week. So we started experimenting with, gelato drinks and how to make those, and including what we called gelato, where we actually made a latte instead of with steamed milk. We steamed our gelato in there. And that was, Jim likes to say, you couldn't go anywhere else in Kansas City and get a gelato. It was kind of a little bit of our blue ocean in terms of that. But so what we would do is we would adjust the price, and we studied both consumer psychology and consumer behavior, as well as just the raw data, and we'd say, okay, we know that if we had 3 sizes of a cup of gelato, and so okay, we know that from a psychology standpoint, if we start introducing it as saying you can have a large and a regular instead of a medium, and a small cup of gelato, that just reversing the order, instead of large, regular, small, or instead of small, regular, large, saying large, regular, small, that anchors in their mind the large size, and the regular suddenly seems attractive instead of the small being. And we also knew that by adjusting the prices, and again, this is data that's telling us all this, we can make the regular size and the large size too more attractive from that standpoint. Now, there's some sacrifices to be made on that, in that we may lower our cost of goods margin, our gross margin on the large cup, but that's still more dollars in our pocket, so that's a good thing. And then what we did, so we would make those changes, and then we would look at our data, sit back and see, okay, what are we doing? By adjusting our price, by raising the price of a small cup of gelato, did we impact our sales? Are we selling fewer items overall? We wanted to sell fewer cups as a percentage, fewer small cups as a percentage, but did we sell less overall? Like, are people walking away? And so we could tell pretty quickly if what we were doing was being successful or not. And that was a success. We had other examples that were probably less successful, but it's the data that drives it. And your data tells you, we like to say, it tells you the story of what's happening in your store, and it tells you what you can do about what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you're looking at that data, and you say that it tells you what's going on, what happens in terms of, people who can you go overboard with too much focus on the data and calling victory by saying, well, the numbers line up and this was a success because we have more sales. Are there situations where you might find that all of the metrics for success in the data are pointing toward success, but it was actually a failure?
Yes, that's actually the because in a retail store the margins are small, so we really focus a lot on gross margins and how we're doing. Are they going in the right direction? But you can absolutely maximize your gross margin in short term by cutting the quality of your product, but you sacrifice your future sales when you do that. And so if you only look at, and there's been examples, we never did this in our stores, and I don't know of customers, we would not let a customer do that from our advice standpoint. But there's been examples of restaurants that are well known, and that they would they want to maximize their profit, maybe for a potential sell, they want to sell, so they'll make a short-term sacrifice in quality because it will immediately jack up their profits and they look much better on paper. But the reality is that they're sacrificing their future business in order to do that.
How do you know that though?
That is tricky. I mean, the one way obviously you can know that is you should be obviously tracking your reviews and everything else and see. And if you obviously start getting a pretty quick downturn of because when you do that, as I said, that kind of that short-term sacrifice for profit, customers will typically notice that and fill that out and stuff. They don't always respond though, and so there can be enough of a delay there to do that it can be a challenge. So I think the challenge of the example Mark was giving there is it can take a while to see that impact, and you might go 2 or 3 months without really noticing it, and then by the time you notice it, it's almost a little bit too late to do anything. I mean, you can do some pretty long-term damage that's hard to reverse on that circumstance.
I mean, obviously we want to avoid doing that, and so best practices for how to get enough data, both from the sales data and then the experience and all of that stuff. Like, how would you advise somebody to go about collecting, like a framework for collecting data that will result in a decision that's not going to have a long-term negative consequence, or at least, they can hedge their bets a little bit better?
Right. Well, let me give you two a little bit different examples and maybe see if this will resonate. The first is, we will see people, we recommend price increases and do that. And most shops that we work with will have some organic growth anyway. And so if you look at just your overall sales numbers, even if you're just doing a straight year-to-year comparison, you may say things look really good. You may have a new marketing campaign, a product or whatever, and maybe let's say you're seeing 10% growth, and you say, this is great. We rolled this out and this looks wonderful. Unless you are going a step further though, and really doing some predictive sales analysis, and for us, that is kind of trend sales analysis and looking at it. And what you may find out is, well, hey, wait a minute, I was going to do 10% no matter what. This new marketing campaign didn't have any impact. It didn't do anything. I predict my sales out, and it can give me a little bit of an indication of, where am I going and everything else with it. So then I can phrase it in. And suddenly I'm looking at this and saying, oh, wait a minute, I was predicted to do 12%. I only did 8%. If I looked at 8, so I had a horrible week. If I thought 8% was a good number, just because year over year 8% is good, then I'd say, oh, well, then everything was great. So sometimes it's taking that bigger holistic picture to say, really, where am I doing? If I'm looking at some trend analysis, then I can start measuring if some of the things that I'm putting in place to long-term improve my business are actually working. Or am I just kind of, as I said, organically growing? I did a price increase and I'm seeing this boost, but it's nothing that I really changed in my business to do that. That was the first example I was thinking of. I think the second example, and we've seen this where people do kind of, extreme or not very extreme, but moderate discounting. And they will look at that and say, hey, look, we ran this promotion and everything else, and really see some top line improvement. and not realize they've actually hurt their bottom line. So unless they're digging deep enough into their numbers and really following through and looking at that, we're not big fans of discounting. I'll give that disclaimer starting up. I think it's a risky proposition for most coffee shops. But when you do that, and I was listening to a podcast, I can't remember where, but they were talking, I think it was a very large food chain, and they were promoting, it was a webinar, it was a webinar, and they were talking about, all these sales trends and everything else, and they were talking about this promotion, and they're reading through, and I'm like, this promotion hurt their business. I can tell that. I can run the numbers. That's why we started doing an example. And they were promoting this as this is the greatest success. Look what it did and everything else. And so I think that's a trend when you can really look at data. You can kind of casually look at the data and say, oh, things are going well. But unless you really understand the data and you have kind of multiple layers of that data to look at, that you can say, oh, this actually did not help my business and potentially maybe even hurt my business.
How do you eliminate confirmation bias in that way? I mean, it sounds like the unicorn, right? But I'm thinking you're wanting somebody to have a more robust, multi-layered approach to analysis. So owners of a coffee shop are, juggling a lot of different things in there, just kind of getting what they can when they can. What kind of a rhythm, what kind of a strategy is there involved to creating a little bit more of a solid, habit of looking at the data?
Yeah, one is to make it easier. So if you have a system where, as we said, I'll date ourselves. You talk about, all this back-end data is kind of easy to get. When we started, we had a POS system that was closed off. You couldn't pull data out of it. We moved to Square before Square had an API and had really actually terrible reporting. And, you couldn't really see that data and everything else. We had to work really hard to pull it and pull it in the spreadsheets and everything else. So the first thing is, you really need a system in place where that data is pretty readily usable, so you don't have to jump in. You have some pretty good visualizations. The visualizations show you a lot of information in one layout, so that you're not having to spend the time. Because the truth is you're right. A coffee shop owner juggles a lot of different things. And if they have to spend a whole lot of time, exporting out data and putting it into an Excel spreadsheet and then manipulating that data and doing it, it just doesn't happen. So I think the important part there, as I said, having tools available to you. And as I said, a lot of POS systems now have pretty good tools. There are outside systems that you can pull multiple levels of data in and look at and do that and have easy visualization so you can see it. Because confirmation bias is a real. We wrote a full article on that and the impact it has on businesses, because we're all subjected to it. Confirmation bias affects all of us. What you have to do is try to, as we said, use your data as much as possible to overcome it, will be the term that I use.
Our platform was, that we use right now, our analytics platform, is what we built for ourselves to use. And we built it to be simple and uses lots of pretty pictures and graphs that we find meaningful, so you can really tell at a glance, okay, this is what's important, and this is what I need to be looking at every day. And if it adjusts, then I need to pay attention. And, then when you can also use it, like I said, every time we would make a change, we'd monitor it and look at it and say, okay, did we lose any business over this? How did this affect? Did our product mix change the way that we wanted it to, or maybe did it change, in a way we didn't expect? Keeping it simple, like Jim mentioned, is as long as you keep it simple and you keep it consistent and you're looking at all the numbers in our workshops. We tell people these are the critical numbers. This is what you need to know or have access to pretty quickly. And, you can create it yourself in Excel, if you want to. You just need to make sure that it's something that you update and look at consistently.
Okay, so the follow-up question then is kind of a two-parter, and that is, Jim, you mentioned about how this large company wanted to showcase their great quote-unquote success in a promotional thing where you could see that it was going to harm their business. They couldn't. It seems like they're shooting for they're trying to fight for some kind of a win in a different category than you're looking in. Like, they were competing against their competitor. They weren't looking at their business. They were just looking at, one-upsmanship and stuff like that. I wonder if you see anything like that in the industry where we create metrics that seem meaningful for our businesses and we pursue those. And then to follow up on what you were just talking about, what are those categories that we actually should care about in contrast?
Right. That's funny. That brings up one of our favorite sayings, and that is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality. And, we'll see that. And you're right. So a lot of that one-upmanship, you see a lot of that in kind of, vanity type numbers, and top line revenue can very much be a vanity type number and do that and drive this. And we had all sorts of these people came in, through it and everything else. And then at the end of the day, they said, well, but if you're not making any profit, then did it really matter? Did it really help you and everything else? And then the bottom line comes down to, you can be profitable and still, if you're not managing your cash, you can still go out of business, so it takes it all the way down to there. So we're very, top line stuff is great. You want to see your revenue overall growing and everything else with it, but it's really more the bottom line that drives businesses and keeps them open. And then it's that, ultimately that cash that hits the bank that allows you to sleep at night. And do that. And, when you're operating, and it's true, not for the coffee industry, it's really true for pretty much any small business, because you'll have up and downs and you'll have times. And, for us, you may have an 18-month pandemic that, really just hammers you in all sorts of ways that you could never imagine to do that. So having, those pieces working well and working right is what will, hopefully get you to the next business day.
Okay. So when to drill down a little bit more here, if you're talking to somebody about the spreadsheet that they have, here are the things that you need to check in on. What are those things, and how often should they be checking them?
One of the numbers that we do that a lot of coffee shops don't look at is your prime number, which is really you're combining what your labor percentage is and what your COGS percentage is, and rolling those two numbers up, and for a coffee shop, for us, those numbers should add up to about 50 to 60%. If you can bring those two numbers into line and do that, and you control it a couple ways. When we say COGS, most people think COGS is, well, it's how much am I spending on my coffee beans? Well, that's part of it, but it's also part of what is your product mix? What are you selling your items for? That really brings it in line. And then everybody, labor, obviously, and right now, as I said, we probably have a hyper focus on labor, which I think most coffee shops need to, because, labor costs are going up for everybody. And it's the piece of the business that is most likely, I think, to bankrupt companies right now, to be honest. So for us right now, there is a hyper focus on labor. Hopefully that will get back into more of a normal range at some point. But right now, especially with, the labor costs going up the way they are, the challenge of, keeping and retaining staff and the cost of staff turnover and everything else with it, that's a number we're kind of hyper focused on. But long term, as I said, we like to roll those two numbers up into, your prime cost of your business and look at that. And for us, that's, to be honest, it's probably a weekly exercise. I'd love to say you could look at that daily, most can, and it doesn't quite fluctuate as much. So it's weekly. Once your business is a little bit more stable, I think even if you're keeping a close eye on it monthly, you can manage it pretty well.
So weekly, or even keeping a close eye on it monthly, where in this process do you think that somebody should start to take action on a trend that they see is not healthy?
Labor immediately. I mean, it's one of those issues that, as I said, you have to figure out if you're over or under staffing. I mean, that's something that's an exercise you always have to go through. And as your labor costs are going up, you have to make for sure your pricing is matching that to keep you there. So for us, as I said, that's one you have to respond to pretty quickly. I mean, even in this year, we're general believers in that you should do an annual price increase for most coffee shops. We're in an environment that you could probably have done 2 this year and gotten away with that. Small, 5% type price increases, not doing a 20% price increase, but raising that to do that to kind of offset the cost, because, you could turn around in 2 or 3 months from now and your labor costs have buried you if you haven't managed it.
I would add to that, when we look at trends and we look at everything in trends and comparisons, we're typically looking at like over an averaged 8-week period. And so that's, 8 weeks is roughly a couple of months, and you can kind of see, okay, how am I doing? What's happening? But when we're looking at labor and sales both, and labor and sales together at your labor ratio, we actually segment that into hourly, so that you can see each hour of the day that you're open, you can see what your sales were, and you can see what your labor ratio is. And what that will tell you, and we've seen this, I think, in almost every customer we've ever had, that there is almost always 1 or 2 hours on almost every day of the week that they're either overstaffed or understaffed during that time period. And that a lot of times, especially for coffee shops right now, where labor is such an important part of it, then you can adjust your labor, and that will, make a massive difference in terms of your overall profitability.
Sure. And, let's be honest, it's easier said than done. Because
Yes.
we have a lot
Yes.
of promises made to people for a certain number of hours per week. And so the discussions are always there of how do I, adjust labor, and that's another ball of wax, I understand. But the concept of looking at these numbers, and let's not pretend that it's not like somewhat easier to be on a podcast talking about these things, actually taking action on doing them in the cafe. Yeah. So in terms of how somebody can sort of get over, I don't want to say get over, but create more of a smaller gap between receiving the data that tells them a message that, hey, this is really something that needs to be adjusted, and then taking action on that. How do we create a little bit more of an action-oriented focus on data?
Part of that is making for sure that, the owners has a process in place for their sales. We talk about obviously processes for doing cleaning and, the setup and all of this. Our opinion is, the owner should have a process of, how am I doing this? Like, I don't just crank out the schedule every 2 weeks, just copy the last one over and pull it in there. I should have a process in place that I go through, and I look at the last 8 weeks, and I look at the trends, and I see that and find that out and figure that out. I should have a process in place to, especially a new shop opening up, they may not look at a P&L for months, because they just don't have the time to enter the stuff in and everything else. Set up a process that, on Friday afternoons, I'm going to take the time and I'm going to get all my invoices entered in. I'm going to put all that information in that I have to, and then I'm going to run my, QuickBook reports and take a look at that, see if anything pops out. So part of it is, as I said, is, owners focusing and building a process to say, managing my numbers, managing my data is just as important as any other part of the business that I'm doing. And so I need to make for sure I am setting up the time to do that on a regular basis, and, making myself do that. Because if not, I will let everything else get in the way. And suddenly it's, a couple months past and I haven't, paid any attention to it.
I imagine there's also a component, and obviously having a plan and a system in place is a surefire way to make sure that you're going to guard against, just forgetfulness, and generally, again, people are pulled in lots of different directions. But I imagine there's also, you have to plan on how you're going to react to this. Like you can get all that data, and you can, faithfully get that data. But then I suppose you'd have to say, well, what are my options? What if it tells me something good? How do I react? What if it tells me something bad? Then what do I do? What are my options there? Have you seen people do this well, and or do this poorly? Because we can just hoard the data and be very good at that, but then not do anything with it. maybe because we just don't have a plan or didn't even think past the idea of, after I get it, what in the heck do I do with it?
Taking action isn't nearly as difficult as looking at the data and understanding what you need to look at and how to interpret it. And so that's why we tell people that, in our workshops and on our platform, we tell people these are the important numbers. This is what it looks like. This is what the picture should look like. And then most people, taking action on it, raising your price, for example, it's a psychological hurdle to get over. Mm-hmm. But one of the ways that we help people get over that is we'll actually do a back, looking analysis on 12 months of their sales data. And we'll just tell them, and this is actually how we got over it, because we experienced the same thing in our own stores is, okay, let's say you did a 5% price increase across the board. And let's say you actually did lose 1% of your business, that you sold, 1% fewer items, and we'll give them a number of what that would look like. This is still the impact on your bottom line. And it's always positive, and the reality is you're not going to lose 1% of your business. That doesn't happen. I don't know any examples of that happening in a retail store. And so, but that is a psychological barrier. So we'll just tell people, look, this is how you get over that, by considering even if that did happen, it's still a net positive to me, and it's still something that I need to do. So usually, when something is good, well, we tell people you continue doing those things, whatever behaviors, processes, procedures, whatever led to that. If your gross margins are really good, if your labor is really healthy, if your business keeps growing and your customers, then you're doing the good things and you keep monitoring that. It's usually not big dramatic shifts that matter. It's the small areas that we tell people. Retail stores will live and die on small incremental changes, not usually on massive. You may hit a home run with a product like the cronut or something, but for most of us, that's just not where success or failure is. It's going to be in the small. Okay, I'm going to schedule one person in the 1 to 2 hour. I need one less person, or I need somebody to leave half an hour before they normally do within that time frame. Or it's doing a small targeted 5% price increase on the top 5 selling items that I have, not on everything, so it's not across the board, but maybe it's just my 80% of my business comes from these 5 items. I can increase the price on that. Most people will never notice, and all of that goes straight to my bottom line. That's where success or failure in retail usually happens.
That makes so much sense, because preventative maintenance is the same kind of concept. What you do with your equipment and how you keep it running is you do regular maintenance on it. And it just sounds like a healthy way to go about it. However, I'll bet that in your seminars that you give and the clients that you have, and I bet people come to you with just like, we haven't done any of these things for so long, and now we're really kind of up the river without a paddle.
Well, that was my exact thought. I was thinking of when you were saying that when things are good, I hate to use the term lazy, but when things are going really good, you don't have to worry about as much. Well, my labor's 10 hours overinflated, but no big deal. We're still making money, and I don't really need to look at my product mix because things are going good. And you don't take the time to do that. And then suddenly, if things aren't going so good, you're right. It's harder to pull back that grass. Like you said, if you've got everybody's schedule, it's like, well, wait a minute, I can't cut 20 hours out of the labor now, because I've kind of made these promises and the commitment and everything else. And, if you're not always managing the business in both good and bad times, because that's when we tend to see people come to us more is, when things are maybe bad, what do I need to do? I'm panicked. And And it's kind of like, if cashless situations are probably, cash flow is a lot easier to deal with when things are going well. When things are going poorly, no banks will talk to you, no banks will do anything with you and everything else. And so we tend to wait till things are going bad to make the changes instead of managing things really well when things are going good. And so I think that's, and that's a lesson maybe, again, that we've learned over the last 18 months, because we don't know when things are suddenly going to turn really quickly on us. And it isn't just a pandemic that will cause that. Lots of different things can have a fairly quick negative impact, and things can go from being really good to not so good pretty quickly. And so managing your business well in the good times is a great thing for people to pick up on and do.
You never know. We'd like to give the example. Everybody was impacted by the pandemic in the industry in the U.S., and we saw, what can happen when there's a global scale type event. But, smaller scale events happen all the time. In Kansas City, over the last, gosh, I don't remember, Jim, when it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they put a streetcar in the downtown area. Great idea. It's been a huge success since they put it in. While they were building it, all the stores on the Main Street where that streetcar was going in, they were still open, but it was really hard to get to them, and their business suffered. It was a boon to their business after it opened, but during that time frame, it was a difficult, very difficult path, because their business was affected. That sort of stuff happens all the time to businesses, and it's just something we need. You need to be aware of that. Just because everything is great today doesn't mean it's going to be that way tomorrow, and you need to be able to adjust, and using your data and taking an objective view. And it's interesting that you mentioned cognitive bias, because we talk a lot about cognitive bias. That's why we preach you use your data, because it teaches you to be objective about your store, and it lets you be much more flexible and nimble, and you can adjust quickly.
You've come from, in your previous roles in companies, you came from larger corporations, I imagine, and now you're dealing with a lot of very small businesses. And I'm curious about whether that is kind of a psychological thing that is unique to small businesses. In other words, not managing your business, but not managing it in such a strategic way. I see some part of me thinks coffee shop owners and some small businesses operate on a lot of hope as a strategy.
I can tell you this. Jim mentioned, I had the thought when Jim was talking about, that it's easy to get, lackadaisical about your business when when things are going really well. That's true across the board for all businesses.
Yes.
I mean, you see that on businesses of all size. We saw that with Intelligent, our first company. We worked with registered investment advisors that, the vast 90% of our customers were all registered investment advisors, some smaller, some larger. That's a very profitable business. And these are really smart people that doing it. But we saw that all the time where, when the stock market's going great and everything's going well, it's easy to hire more people and to spend more money. And this is true across the board. When business is well, it's easy to get, all the words I can think of are really negative, but it's easy to get, lackadaisical about your business. You're not looking at it, and you're taking on extra cost. You're taking on extra burden that may not feel that bad in a moment, but when the tide suddenly shifts, and it will always suddenly shift, for every business in some way, shape, or form. There's just business cycles that are a reality. That's when it's really hard, and you have to scramble, and that's when it's really painful, because that's when you have to let people go, where and nobody likes to do that, or that's when you have to cut somebody's hours drastically, in half or more, and that and they depend on that job, and there's always a loss associated with it. And that's why we like to say, when you're running your business objectively, then for one, it helps everybody that's affected, your employees, your vendors, your bankers, your landlord, whatever, whatever kind of business relationships you have with that. If everybody knows that you're being objective and you're running the healthiest business possible, it makes all of the changes easier.
I'll throw out another cliche on that topic because you're done the, small business to large business. Another saying is, working on your business versus working in your business. And, a lot of, in particular, small businesses have to spend so much time working in their business that it's hard to work on their business. But taking that time to do that can really help you. And big companies are better at working on their business. They'll have people dedicated to it. As smaller businesses, we can't do that, so we have to carve out the time ourselves to be able to work on that business instead of spending all of our time working in our business.
Yeah, that, of course, the great Michael Gerber, always relevant.
Yeah.
So I guess the last question I have for you here, and this has been fantastic, thank you both, is what's next? We have, small business owners, operators in the audience who want to, steer their business and not be taken for a ride, so to speak, and use data well and do what we've been talking about. After they, log off the podcast, what would you suggest somebody start with this week?
Start looking at your data. Look at what you really have. In our experience, most retail stores, and that includes most coffee shops, don't really look at the type of data they have. They'll look at their sales numbers, they'll look at their margins, but they may look at their labor percentage, and usually the more locations they have and the more of a professional operator they are, and anybody can be a professional operator with any number of locations, that you just have to look at the type of data that you have and how managing it can be, and paying attention to it can be effective for your business. And we like to say it helps put the odds in your favor. So if you're looking at, the gross margins, and you're looking at cost of goods, and you're looking at labor percentage, then start to look at your product mix. Look at the number of items that you're selling and the average cost, the average price of that item, because you want that trending upward too. There is mostly, in almost all cases, there's other information that you can look at. We talk about it in our workshops where, putting it out on social media and everything else, that it's not a totally exhausting list, right? You don't want to get so granular and navel gaze into your business, but there's a lot more information there that can benefit you and your business. And I would say, like Jim mentioned earlier, if there's one thing that you're not looking at that you probably should look at, it's going to be your prime cost.
I'll answer too for, what do you do next? One is, don't be intimidated by it. I mean, actually managing and working our data is not as bad as it seems. I think a lot of people just say, I can't do this, I'm not capable. You can. Maybe, as I said, pick off an area. If you say, look, I don't have a lot of time, I'm spending so much time on my business, I'm understaffed right now to do this, pick off one area. Say, I'm going to this week really do a deep dive and look at my labor and see where that is in this. And, next week I'll do a deeper dive and look at my product mix, or I will do a deeper dive and look at my pricing. Have I adjusted that and do that? Break it off into smaller pieces that you can look at. Say, okay, I don't have to get everything done tomorrow, but this week I can look at this, and next week I can look at this. I'm going to carve an hour out of my week somewhere and spend the time doing that.
This is really great advice. Both of you, thank you again for being on the show. And this gives us some places to start. And this stuff does need to be demystified. And I think you've done a great job of doing that. And if anyone makes it out to Coffee Fest, they should definitely be listening to what you have to share there in your lectures. So where can people go to learn more about PerfectCube?
So our website is perfectcube.co. Not .com, .co. They wanted too much money for perfectcube.com. And then on Instagram and Facebook, we're PerfectCube Data.
Well, thank you both again. It was great to have this conversation. I appreciate all that you've shared.
We enjoyed it.
Chris, thank you
Great
for
talking with you.
inviting us.
We talk
Yeah,
over
Chris.
each other live all the time.
No, Chris, we appreciate it, and I appreciate your audience, listening to us, and hopefully we gave them some, piece of advice and useful information that they can use.
Well, I hope that you got a lot from that conversation with Mark and Jim of PerfectCube. So many great points made here, especially the idea of confirmation bias that we have when it comes to, the decisions we make around data and what we think it means, and how, certain trends can kind of muddy the waters. I think that was a really great point brought up here. Of course, there's many great things that Mark and Jim discussed, and I hope that you got something that will help you approach your data in a healthy way, in a way that actually fuels the success of your business. So big thank you to Mark and Jim for being on the show. We really appreciate your expertise here. So if you want to learn more information about PerfectCube and their services, you can go to their website, perfectcube.co. That's perfectcube.co, and you can find all that you need to know there on their website. And if you have anything that you'd like to ask me, or have any feedback or comments about today's episode or any episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to email myself at chris@keystotheshop.com. And that is also the email to use for Keys to the Shop Consulting. Again, that is chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, in this conversation today, in this episode, we've mentioned Coffee Fest, and that's coming up pretty shortly in November in Portland, Oregon. Coffee Fest trade shows have been going on for over 25 years, providing just the best value, the best content, and the best experience for those of you in coffee retail who really want to attend an event that helps you thrive, that helps energize your staff, and gives you the tools to succeed. Lectures, workshops, trainings, the trade show floor, the community competitions. It's all there at Coffee Fest, and I'm also there at Coffee Fest at every show, every year. So if you're a Keys to the Shop listener, I'd love to meet you as I am judging latte arts and giving lectures at Coffee Fest as well. So if you're interested in attending Coffee Fest, go to coffeefest.com and register today. I guarantee it. You're going to have a great time. It's a fantastic show. Again, that website, coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our episode. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, share these episodes, and don't forget to have a great day. Thank you very much again. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.